If you're an electronic music producer or a DJ and haven't heard of Camelphat, then you must be living under a rock. These guys single-handedly have defined how genres such as progressive and melodic techno are expected to sound like. One of the biggest specialities of Camelphat is their emotional breakdowns that leave the audience who go to their concert with a memorable emotional feeling because they create moments within the set. So what makes Camelphat breakdown so special? There are many factors, but one of the main factors is their chord progression. And in this tutorial, I'll be going over some of the things that Camelphat do in order to make their song feel special by analyzing their chord progression. If you struggle with music theory, I found a simple way to analyze chord progressions using certain tools provided by Ableton, and I'll be doing a free webinar for a short period of time, and I'll put a link in the description to sign up for that free webinar. I'll also be giving away a free Camelphat chords MIDI pack at the end of the free webinar, so don't forget to sign up. To really understand how Camelphat approach their chord progressions, I decided to pick 4 songs that are slightly different from each other stylistically, but have a very high emphasis on emotion. They're very focused on how to drive the emotions during the breakdowns and have elaborate breakdowns. The first one we're going to go over is Camelphat and Anyma's track The Sign, which was released on Afterlife record, and these are the chords for the track. Okay, so let's dive into this. So first thing you want to note is that the song is in the scale of G minor. The one note is essentially the root note of that scale, and the root note is in the name of the scale. So for G minor, G is the one note and the root note. And that's why a chord that is made with that root note is considered the one chord. So the chords that make up this chord progression are 6, 7, 1, 2, 3. And 6, 7, 1, 4. What this means is the chord progression is 8 bars long, where 6, 7, and 1 are repeated twice, but then there is a slight variation where 2 and 3 come in as transitionary chords because they're shorter than the rest of the chords, and then an extra note or extra chord, 4 chord, is added to the second variation of this chord progression. We now know that Camelphat like chords 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 1, 4. Have you ever wondered why sometimes you're able to predict the final chord or the last chord of a chord progression when you're listening to a song, even though you might not be really good at music theory? This is actually a very natural psychological response to certain chord progression. And the one thing that we always look for at the end of a chord progression is a resolution. What that means is that it feels like the chord progression ended. It feels like there was no tension consistently sustained. So in Camelphat's song, you notice that the one chord is actually placed as the third chord rather than the first chord. So when people are listening to the chord progression, they're naturally looking for the resolving chord at the end of the chord progression. But instead of putting it at the end of the chord progression, they put it second to last or third to last in the chord progression. In this second variation, they put it as the second last, and in the first variation, they put it as the third last chord. What that means is after people feel a little resolved with the chord progression, Camelphat decided to create further tension, introducing the 2 and the 3 transitionary chord. And in the second iteration, they increased the tension by just providing the 4th chord again. This means that they wanted this song to have a decent amount of tension, and this can be utilized in songs which are more higher in energy, because your focus in higher energy songs is to create tension and release. Next up, we're going to listen to the chords of their track Many Times, which is a collaboration with Mathame, released on their own label When Stars Align. This is what it sounds like.
You give your heart and I break it. This game's been played and lost too many times.
Again, we see the same chord progression, 6, 7, 1. Even though it's in the E flat minor scale, which is slightly different, we're seeing the same chord progression again and again. So if you were to have the opportunity to send music to When Stars Align, it would be in your best interest to try to play with these 3 chord progressions, because you know that they are the A&R of their own label, and naturally what they enjoy listening to, as can be seen, is the 6, 7, 1 chord progression. So it's very interesting to note, like even within different scales, even with different collaborations, they seem to still favor the 1, 6, 7 chord progression. Finally, let's look at the chord progression of their track Home. That's a collaboration with Rhodes.
I know everyone hurts differently. As a shadow washes over me, I just don't wanna leave. I know anyone can slip away. It doesn't always have to be this way. Over and over again. It isn't you.
Okay, so in this track, they're kind of deviating from the 1, 6, 7 pattern, and they're moving towards the 1, 6, 4, 2 pattern, which is very interesting because the root note is still in the first place of the chord progression. That means that it's resolving adequately, but there is the 2 chord at the end for a really short time to create a little bit of tension just before it resolves again. The other thing to note is also the placements of the chords. You notice in other tracks that we analyzed, the chord progression, they're pretty much equally placed within like the multiples of 4 or 2. You know, you can see like 2, 3, like 1 bar each, and then like maybe 2 bars. The only difference is over here, maybe there's like a transitionary part, but over here, instead of it being a 4-bar chord, it's almost like ending at 4.4.3. So this is really nice because what it does is it creates a little bit of unpredictability, because we can still predict that the chord progression is going to end and resolve back to the 1 chord. The timing of the chords can throw you off a little bit and create excitement within the track itself. So if you were to summarize this tutorial, essentially Camelphat love minor scales. They also love using the 1, 6, and 7 chord in the chord progression. They love switching up the pattern so that the root note chord or the 1 chord is not always placed in the start of the chord progression, rather maybe in the 3rd position or even in the 2nd last or the 3rd last position. They also like to place their chords slightly off grid and off like the 1 bar, 2 bar, 4 bar common patterns, and maybe switch it a little bit before the expectation of the next chord comes in, so they can create some unpredictability within their chord progression. Now, if you're not strong with music theory and still want to understand how to analyze these chord progressions, I figured out a very simple way of doing this, and I will be hosting a free webinar that will be teaching you how to analyze these chord progressions, and I'll be giving away a free Camelphat MIDI pack at the end of the free webinar. We're also doing a Black Friday sale where we're giving away a huge discount of 50% on all our project files. This includes the Camelphat When Stars Align project files, as well as John Summit I Remember project file. Just use the code BLKFriday in the link in the description below. If there's something very specific that you want to learn with music production or music marketing, or if you want me to analyze another chord progression, or if you want me to analyze another artist or another label, comment below and I'll try to get to it as soon as possible. We also have a Discord community of producers who consistently help each other grow, so feel free to join that as well. Thanks for watching. Take care.